Perhaps before I begin, maybe I just want to inquire with everyone that you can hear and see me.
Thank you for that. And I think that's Joseph, I'm assuming. We can hear you, but I can't see you. Oh, I can see you now. There you go. Kia ora, Joseph. Look, thank you very much for coming along to this Justice Subcommittee to make a submission on the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill. I'm going to kind of dispense with formalities because time is tight, and
Yes.
we're giving you 10 minutes to submit, including any questions that members may ask. So I'm going to hand straight over to you and invite you to make your submission. Kia ora.
Talofa lava, ma lo le lei soi fo mawa, ma le langi e mama, bozu se, a me lai ven ke manan, a me la che jehu. Tēnā koutou, toi tū te mana o te whenua, toi tū te mana motu ake, toi tū te tiriti o Waitangi. My name is Joseph Hulwe. I am an Indigenous Canuck from New Caledonia. I am Samoan. I am a father, a husband, and in my spare time, a lawyer. Today, I have the honor of making oral submissions on behalf of the Pacific Lawyers Association, or the PLA. We vehemently oppose the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill. These submissions do not intend to represent all the views of the multitude of separate and vastly different cultures from the Moana or the Blue Pacific, but rather our mandate emanates from the diversity of Indigenous Pacific peoples and our affiliates reflected in our membership. They include members of the judiciary, the legal fraternity, students, business leaders, volunteers, and members of the Pacific Island community in Aotearoa. We reiterate our support to Te Hungaroa Māori o Aotearoa, or the Māori Lawyers Association, and we endorse the findings of the Waitangi Tribunal's Ngā Matapono reports. But above all else, we stand together with tangata whenua Māori, who are our whanaunga, as Indigenous peoples of Moana Nui Akiwa, or the Pacific Ocean. Our peoples developed cultures, rich cultural praxis, navigated the largest ocean in the world thousands of years before European contact and the untimely imposition of Western political thought. We reiterate this significant and important historical context because it also formed part of the context in which Māori operated when they signed Te Tiriti and agreed through grace and aroha to work in partnership with the Crown and its many subjects. It is in spite of putatively damaging and pernicious tools like this bill that Māori continue to entrench and protect their innate and inalienable rights, both as the first persons of this land and Te Tiriti partners. We support our brothers and sisters, especially when their dignity and rights are under attack. The PLA views this bill as the proverbial snake in the grass, or to paraphrase the indelible Natalie Coates, the taniwha pretending to wear Te Tiriti bedazzled horowai. The bill, which was ostensibly doomed to fail, aimed to bring about a much-needed national debate about Te Tiriti. The framing of this bill and its contents obfuscates the bill's true intention, and that is to impose a finality to erase and be done with the country's foundational compact insofar as it removes the recognition of tino rangatiratanga and halts Māori progress towards meaningful redress and reclamation. The bill seeks to unilaterally create a legal fiction from the ashes of ignorance and misconception. It is a bill that contravenes our Constitution. The courts over a course of more than 40 years have developed the principles of the treaty as a way to give effect to Te Tiriti in the absence of applying the text directly. It looks to mimic the spirit and meaning of Te Tiriti and the treaty in a way that holds at the heart of its development the existing relationship that exists between Māori and the Crown. This relationship requires the parties to work together in good faith, and even goes as far as to impute a responsibility on the Crown to protect Māori interests Te Tiriti and the treaty sought to protect. This bill is not even an attempt at developing the laws on the principles as they currently are. It cannot even be said to be a shadow cast from the dilution that is the current treaty principles. That is to say, the bill is far more removed from Te Tiriti than even the current treaty principles. Rather, it is a tool that will be used to disestablish the several attempts by both Māori and the Crown to acknowledge the historical context in the hopes of moving forward as a country. Clause 9 of the bill is perhaps most dangerous, saying that the bill will not amend the text of Te Tiriti. It is clear from its intent, echoed by its sponsor and its contents, that it may not change the words, but it will make sure that they lose their meaning. Finally, the bill is incompatible with Aotearoa's international obligations under the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, or UNDRIP. Aotearoa was a reluctant signatory to this foundational text, and our courts acknowledged its significance in domestic law, commenting in the Supreme Court case of Alison the King that tikanga and/or tikanga-derived principles are part of the fabric of Aotearoa New Zealand's law and public institutions, highlighting Aotearoa's commitment to UNDRIP. That commitment to UNDRIP includes a commitment to Māori people's right to self-determination under Article 3 of that compact. The bill has been made without any consultation or consideration of Māori self-determination and looks to disavow rather than acknowledge the importance of tino rangatiratanga. We urge the legislature to rid themselves of this misconceived and disquieting bill and to consider a world where our constitution and the rights of Indigenous peoples from the moana can work harmoniously for the greater good of this amazing country. Whakataitele lava o Luset Oleti.
Kia ora, Malo. Thank you for that, Joseph. We do have some questions, so we'll go straight to those tākata first.
Tēnā koe te rangatira, kei ngā ngāngo te moana nui a kiwa tēnā koutou. E hoa, I know that you're just a lawyer in your spare time, and more importantly, we're fathers. So I'm interested to hear from you, and from a point of view of the Pacifica community, we're pretty clear that there is some insidious and quite likely intergenerational damage being done to our tamariki and our mokopuna. I want to ask you if you think that that damage would spill over to our Pacifica tamariki and mokopuna.
Well, I think what those submissions try to address clearly is that part of the Pacific community includes tangata whenua Māori. So the issues that affect Māori are issues that affect those from the moana. And that's because we have an inextricable historical link that spans generations before us and will certainly remain generations after we leave. So yes. Simply put, what you say or have described are things that we will, as those from Moana Nui Pacifica, we will experience too, for sure.
Kia ora, thank you for that. We've got two more questions, so we'll try to get to them both. Steve? You got your mute thing going.
Mute, there you go. Thank you for your excellent submission. You mentioned specifically at point 25 about United Nations Declaration of Indigenous Peoples that it described as a mutually reinforcing standard of both self-determination and tino rangatiratanga, which in effect creates the basis upon which tangata whenua can seek to determine their own affairs within the context of partnership with the Crown. Why is it, and it might seem an overly simplistic question, why is self-determination and the right to determine your own affairs so important to peoples?
No, thank you for that question, Steve. I think what you'll find, and it's the experience of a lot of Indigenous cultures, particularly those in the Pacific, where we experience interaction with our former colonial powers more meaningfully and in a more protracted sense, right? And self-determination means more because anytime we come to any discussion or table where what's being discussed implicates not just the people who are sitting at that table, but our future generations, our mokopuna, we see that enabling ourselves to have a basis upon which we can say and describe the ways in which our lives should persist from here on out is part and parcel of self-determination. And that's why it's so important to us. And that's why we are always ensuring that at any discussion about the future or the current status of our people in relation to other people within the country, that we make it really sacrosanct and because we need to be able to do that. Sorry, so I know I'm taking up time.
Kia ora, I'm just aware of time, and I did want to give the last member who had a question, Joseph Mooney, a quick opportunity. Joseph.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Joseph. Look, just your comment you made, I didn't quite catch it, and I just wonder if you can clarify your comments around the Western legal thought in the Pacific, whether you saw that as a negative, whether you agree with the concept of the rule of law or not.
I think, well, what I'm trying to say, and I think I reflect that more towards the end of the oral submission, is that what's better is to conceive a world where the two, because of the situation that we find ourselves in, can work together harmoniously. But what that means is that we don't denigrate one so that it assimilates to the other. We can have the rule of law, and we can have systems of governance that we've inherited. But it doesn't mean to say that that cannot be incompatible with the rights and dignity of Indigenous peoples. And that's really what I'm trying to make out very clear.
Thanks for that, Joseph. I'm going to cut you off there because we ran out of time, but I think you answered that question. Kia ora, thank you for that, and thank you for your submission. Members, we now have, I think, Murray Hawkes, who should be online as well. Kia ora, Murray. Welcome to the Justice Select Committee on the Principles of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill. I'm going to get straight into it. We're going to you've got 5 minutes to make a submission, including questions. It'd be great if you could leave some time for questions. I'm handing straight over to you. Kia ora.
I'll try to do that. I'm making a submission in favour of the proposed bill as a private individual. My background: I'm also a father. I'm a fourth generation New Zealander, but from immigrant stock, of course. So my presentation, and I'm also a geologist. I'm a rock doctor, and I've worked all over the world in oil and gas. That's not a basis of my submission. The submission, I believe that the country we live in at the moment has been severely damaged by the interpretations, the layers of interpretations by legal and pseudo-legal bureaucracies, who have created interpretations of the treaty which have resulted in divisiveness and uncertainty. An example is the last week a real estate agent was disbarred for not agreeing to enroll in a Maori language course, so she's now no longer able to act as a real estate agent because of regulations supposedly linking back to the treaty. I have 2 adult children, one currently working in Australia and the other studying in the USA. Much as I love my country, New Zealand, I cannot recommend that they plan to live their lives in the dysfunctional society divided on racial lines and with racism and inequality entrenched in legislation, which is where we stand at the moment. The Treaty Principles Bill provides an opportunity to unwind these layers of misinterpretation by bureaucrats and semi-judicial bodies. A huge body of environmental and social precedent, legal precedent, with no founding legal basis has created an absolute mess The first legislation, and I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding, the first legislation that required recognition of the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi was the Resource Management Act back in whenever it was, 88, 89. And that enshrined in law the requirement to have regard to the principles. However, it didn't say what those principles were. It assumed that the treaty was understood, and it was back then. It was understood. But now the massive body of precedent that has been created has left an urgent need to define and enshrine in law what those principles are. It's a disgrace that a generation of politicians have milked the uncertainty and another generation of treaty industry players have milked the public purse on the basis of interpretations that suit the interests of small groups of beneficiaries, especially the Koreans.
You know, we've only got about a minute left. Can we go to a question? We've got a member who wants to ask you a question. Can we do that?
No, I'll go to the end. I'm close to the end.
Okay.
Having worked in many countries in the oil and gas exploration industry, I can honestly say New Zealand is the most corrupt and least attractive regulatory environment that I've worked in. Because of the ambiguity and the need for preference towards Maori, there are demands of race-based payments at every step of the regulatory process and great uncertainty for investors. Because of the lack of regulatory certainty and due to the lack of legislative certainty, this bill will at least, and it doesn't actually matter to me whether the bill gets modified, what the basis of the bill is. What is required is that we understand exactly what the meaning of the legal meaning of the treaty will be.
Okay. Hey, Murray, thanks for that. Your time is up, so thanks for your submission to this committee. Kia ora for that. And we'll go to our next submitter, who is Social Link. So, kia ora, Murray. Hopefully they've got those ready online. Kia ora, Liz from Social Link, I'm assuming. Welcome to the Justice Select Committee on the Principles of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill. I'm going to dispense with formalities because we've got you for 10 minutes and we'll hand straight over to you so we can maximise that time. Kia ora.
Thank you, Duncan. So thank you for the opportunity to speak at the hearings for the Treaty of Waitangi Principles Bill. I've kept my submission short and sweet, so time for questions. Ko Liz Davies toko ingoa. I'm the Chief Executive of Social Link, Te Hono Pāpori, an umbrella peak body for the social and community sector in the Western Bay of Plenty. We build the capability of for-purpose organisations, we facilitate collaboration, as well as give a voice to the sector on issues of relevance to them, such as this bill. Our first main point, Social Link fully opposes the Treaty Principles Bill and urges that it be abandoned before the second reading. We also recommend that legislation introduced to remove reference to the Treaty of Waitangi in legislation, policy and regulations is stopped, and where it has occurred, it is retracted. We believe the bill undermines Māori rights, autonomy and tēnā rangatiratanga. Removing treaty references from legislation is socially divisive, not evidence-based, and lacks consultation with Māori. The bill was drafted without consultation with one of the two Te Tiriti partners, breaching the principles of partnership and the Crown's good faith obligations. Our second main point is about the negative impact on the social and community sectors. The bill will reverse progress made in honouring Te Tiriti within social health and community services. These sectors are crucial to social cohesion. They are the invisible but vital glue that brings communities together. As a sector committed to and working to advance social cohesion, this bill is both disappointing and undermining of tangata whenua and tangata tiriti efforts to grow relationships between communities. Government relies on these sectors, yet the bill would weaken the sector's ability to deliver effective services with, by and to Māori. Thirdly, we see Te Tiriti as a foundation for equity. Many tangata tiriti organisations have worked for decades to understand and uphold Te Tiriti. The bill erases the recognition of Māori as a distinct treaty partner, reducing them to individuals rather than collective iwi and hapu with tēnā rangatiratanga, with the exception of rights agreed under the 1975 Treaty Act. It ignores historical injustices such as colonisation, racism, and economic disparities that impact Māori today. Lastly, we see harmful consequences from the bill, and that the bill's focus is on individual rights and overlooks structural inequities that need to be addressed. Culturally responsive services such as kaupapa Māori health and social services are critical for positive outcomes, and this bill threatens their existence. In conclusion, Social Link urges that the bill does not proceed as it is harmful to Māori, the community sector, and efforts towards equity and social cohesion. Thank you, and I welcome any questions.
Well, kia ora, thank you for that, and thank you for leaving a lot of time for questions. We've got one from Tasha Boa.
Tēnā koe hoa, and thank you for your work and your submission. One of the things that the Tiriti conversation needs in Aotearoa is clarity. And so I wonder if you might consider that just quite simply in the text of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the treaty is being proposed to he whakaminenga, to the Confederation of Chiefs, who were a internationally declared sovereign entity representing Aotearoa, New Zealand. So if things like that can become clearer in the discourse of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, do you think that that would lead to a better future for all people in Aotearoa?
I think clarity certainly would help for everyone, so things can be interpreted accurately as they were meant to be at the time.
All right, Kira, thanks for that. And let's go to Joseph Mooney.
Oh, thank you, and thank you, Liz, for that submission. Look, just in your submission, you were concerned about the emphasis on individuals, and I'm curious about this because Article 2 in the bill doesn't specify that, but if you look at Article 2 of Te Tiriti, it specifically guarantees tino rangatiratanga to kina rangatira, the chiefs, kina hapu to the tribes, and to kina tangata katoa nui te rani, to all of the individuals. So I'm interested, what is your thinking on that aspect of Article 2 of Te Tiriti?
I think Te Tiriti was an agreement with iwi and hapu, and to reduce it down to individuals is a misconception of what was intended. And also I think it becomes very much focused on individualism, and it also then masks structural inequities. And it also assumes that everyone is the same, we're all equal, and we're not. We are not brought into this world equal, unfortunately. So I think that's where it's really quite dangerous.
Just a supplementary, if I could, Chair. Just that, what does the guarantee of tino rangatiratanga to kina tangata katoa o nui te rari mean to you?
It gives them mana motahaki, self-determination, autonomy over their resources, over their people.
And does that extend, would you accept that extends to the rangatira, to the hapu, and to kina tangata katoa?
I would.
All right, let's go to Steve Abel. Thanks, Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your submission. You talk about the importance of social cohesion, which relies on a recognition of the dignity of people and the views of people and their basic right to self-determination. And you pretty clearly articulated that when we have inbuilt inequities, you can't address them by treating everybody as equal, because that just affirms and locks in those inequities. Can you expand on how harmful it is to our social cohesion when we don't recognise the right to people's autonomy?
So I think this bill has been incredibly divisive, which is not what we need at the moment. There's enough divisiveness and misinformation occurring. I believe that social cohesion is fundamental to operating society and community, and this sort of bill is sort of threatening that, which is hugely concerning. Once you start having reduced social cohesion, you're seeing more crime in communities, more mental health issues. It's just absolutely fundamental to our community's health. So things like this bill is really quite dangerous to our communities. And it doesn't support the autonomy of Māori, in my view.
Kia ora. Thank you for that. All right, I think we're done. So thank you ever so much for your submission, and thank you for being generous with the time for questions. It's a really helpful thing to do. So kia ora for that. Thanks, Liz. Thanks for your work in tauranga.
Kia ora, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Members, we now have Liana Poutu. Kia ora, Liana. Welcome to the Justice Select Committee and the hearings on the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill. We've set aside 10 minutes for your submission, and I'm going to hand straight over to you. Kia ora.
E pua wai au no rongi I te tikanga he raurenga no roto I te raukura, ko taku raukura he manau anu I ki te ao. E ngā mema o tēnei o ngā komiti tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Liana Poutu tōku ingoa, he uri tēnei o te taihawa auru o Mania Poto, o te awa tupua o te kāhui tupua hoki. Kāori au I te paku whakai ki tēnei o ngā piri. My background is set out in my written submission, and my written submission also addresses 5 key points. So those have been well covered, I think, by submitters in previous hearings. So I won't go into detail on those, but I will offer some reflections in terms of a recent involvement of mine in te ture whakatupua mō te kāhui tupua. So in my submission, I talk about 5 key points. The first being the bill will create uncertainty. And essentially, my view is that it ignores over 40 years of well-developed and argued treaty jurisprudence. Secondly, the bill is misleading and dangerous. It proposes to rewrite the text of Te Tiriti in essence under the guise of principles. The third point I make is that the bill represents a unilateral amendment of Te Tiriti. So one party to Te Tiriti has been completely ignored in the development of the proposed principles. Fourth point in my submission is that the bill is a heinous act of bad faith. It goes against all of the treaty settlement negotiation processes I've been involved in, and it's contrary to all of the Crown apologies contained in those treaty settlements. The final key point I make in my submission, written submission, is that the bill debate is divisive and unhealthy. The level of hate generated by this bill is unprecedented and overwhelmingly aimed at Māori. So if I can offer some reflections now, I was one of the negotiators on behalf of ngā iwi o Taranaki for the Taranaki Maunga redress, and saw many of you in the House last week when we were there. I offer these reflections because in the apology for Taranaki Maunga, which is contained in Te Ruruku Pūtake Rongo, the collective redress deed. It's also included in Te Ture Whakatupua mō te Kāhui Tupua, which is the collective redress act, which has now received royal assent. So there are essentially 3 paragraphs in the apology to us. And I'm going to read for you quickly 3 parts, a piece from each of those paragraphs. The first, it says, the Crown is sorry that the promise of partnership that arose in 1840 so quickly became a history of conflict, confiscation, and neglect. In the second paragraph of the apology, states the Crown deeply regrets its many breaches of Te Tiriti o Waitangi and its principles, and the immense and compounding harm they have inflicted on the whānau, hapu, and iwi of Taranaki. And in the final paragraph of the apology contained in our redress deed, and the redress legislation, it states the Crown also looks to a future where Taranaki Maunga symbolises and embodies a relationship with you that is founded on trust and a shared respect for Te Tiriti, the Treaty of Waitangi, and its principles. Now, I know what principles my tupuna and I understand to be embodied in Te Tiriti o Waitangi. I know what principles are referred to in Te Ruruku Pūtake Rongo and Te Ture Whakatupua mō te Kāhui Tupua. I know what principles have been tested through the highest of courts in this country and have been debated over several decades. I know what principles every party in the House supported when passing Te Ture Whakatupua mō te Kāhui Tupua just last week. And what the irony is to me is that the proposed principles here are designed to create some certainty. And my view is that these principles have been developed because suddenly they don't fit a particular point of view. They don't suit a modern day kind of view or what's purported to be a modern day view of this country. And what I want to say is that, one of the proposed principles is about the rights of equality, rights to equality. And I want to say that my tupuna didn't ever receive that kind of equality. My tupuna were arrested for ploughing their own land. They were never charged, they were never tried, yet they were imprisoned for years in the South Island, in Te Waipounamu, and served years of hard labour. That's not equality. And you can't tell me that that is a principle that our tupuna signed up to. They didn't sign up to be treated like that. They signed up to be equal. And to suddenly say, actually, one sector of our country is not being, is getting preferential treatment. That doesn't fly in my book. And it doesn't fly in my book because our lived experience of our tupuna doesn't reflect that. I'm keen to leave some time for questions. But I will just quickly say that I recommend the bill is rejected, that no referendum is held, and that the government commit to honouring Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Reira tēnā koutou.
Kia ora. I'm hopeful we'll get through the three members who have questions. Let's go first to Steve Abel.
Kia ora. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for your very powerful submission. You say at the end that you've never witnessed so much racial tension, aggression, and blatant disregard and respect for other human beings as you have since this bill was proposed and introduced. The author of the bill argues that they're just kicking around ideas and that this is a natural part of debate. But can you articulate to the committee, for those of us who are tangata tiriti and Pākehā and are not the subject of this nastiness because we don't get to experience it, what sort of things you are experiencing now as a result of the license that has been given by this bill to those nastiest instincts of some people in our society?
Those who aren't the subject of this hatred and this divisiveness, you don't have to prevent your kids from going on social media. You don't have to explain to your children that they need to ignore that kind of stuff. You don't have to listen to your kids question you why they don't matter, why people think they don't matter. You don't have to continually explain yourselves why you have a particular view because your tupuna weren't treated the way that they were treated. Your lands weren't taken off you. In Taranaki, in our view, our lands were confiscated. They were never legally taken. And so, you know, when you are under a barrage and you're having to put constant energy into all of that responsiveness, you know, it becomes draining when we could be putting our energy on more positive things.
Yeah, Liana Poutu.
Tēnā koe te tuahine, o te rā koutou te maunga tipuara, I tō koutou whakamoe te ingoa o Egmont me te aranga anō Taranaki, tēnā koutou. Ko tahi pēr kia koe, you talk about it's open contravention of Crown apologies to Māori. It's openly and blatantly just steamrolling over all of the commitments that the Crown has made to Māori through the apology process, addressing historic rights, clear breaches. So do you think, I think this, I'm going to ask you if you think this, do you think the bill is actually a clear and arrogant contravention of royal assent?
Could write a thesis on that part, but I think the issue for me is that it puts into question the 100 settlements that this government has undertaken to provide redress for in this country. And actually, when you look at the one that was just passed last week, whole of house support for it, and whole of house support for the apology and those words that I read out that sit in that piece of legislation, which also looks at a future commitment to, you know, upholding the te tiriti and the principles. And I just cannot reconcile the two because they are at complete odds with one another.
Tēnā koe tuahine, ngā me.
We're going to very quickly go to Joseph Mooney. We're a little over time, but I'm going to let him have a question.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair, and tēnā koe, Liana. Look, accepting your point that the rights of your ancestors, their right to be equal before the law, you know, and there's rights that actually come through from the Magna Carta, that no free man shall be taken or imprisoned or be deceased of his freeholder liberties or free customs or be outlawed or exiled or any otherwise destroyed. So accepting your point that your forebears didn't experience that equality before the law, but do you think it's important that your descendants experience that equality before the law?
Absolutely, they should experience equality for the law. But the key issue I have with this bill is that it assumes that everyone's starting from an equal platform. It completely ignores the fact that we haven't been treated equally until this point. And so when you do that, you just create more inequalities because you have the same starting point, ignore what's happened in the past, you just are where you are, and that doesn't create equality, and it doesn't offer my tamariki mokopuna the opportunity to be treated equally.
Thank you for that, Liana. And that brings the time well to an end. So kia ora and thank you again. We now have Pōpātate Marae Incorporated, I hope. I think we now have the representatives of the marae here. So Frances and Kaya Tibble, kia ora. Thank you for coming on to the Justice Select Committee on this Principles of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill. We've got 10 minutes set aside for you, including questions. It would be great if you could leave some time for questions. I'm going to hand straight over to you to make your submission. Kia ora.
Tēnā koutou katoa, nei rā te mihi kia koutou te paipai o te komiti whiriwhiri, ngā tāringa areare, ngā karu hōmiro e whakatātare ana I te pire, hei mua I a tātou katoa. Tēnā e te komiti me tika tō koutou aro, me whakamana I te kupu taurangi, me te taukunetanga o te tiriti o Waitangi kua tō haina tia I oku mātua tūpuna. Tēnei maua ko taku I rā mutu a Kaya Tibu, he mukupuna maua no Ngāti Pikiahu Waiwai, no ngā hapu katoa o te whāroa o te rere, no Ngāti Raukawa ki te tonga no Ngāti Tūwhare toa. Ko Frances Pere hau, tēnei te mihi kia koutou. We stand here before you today as representatives of Paupata Te Marae and Te Tikanga Marae, collectively known as Ngāti Pikiahu Waiwai, carrying the voices of our people, our tupuna, our mokopuna, whose future is at stake, and our whānau who continue to uphold the mana of our iwi and hapu. We are here to say that we strongly oppose the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill in its entirety. This bill is an assault on our rangatiratanga and a direct threat to the future of our tamariki and mokopuna. Our tupuna signed He Tiriti o Waitangi in good faith, believing it would safeguard our tino rangatiratanga, our taonga, and uphold a true partnership with the Crown. The bill completely disregards that promise. It strips Māori of our inherent rights, undermines the mana of Te Tiriti, and threatens the future of our mokopuna. My nephew Kaya will now speak about his views as a rangatahi of Ngāti Pikiahu Waiwai, ngā rangatahi o te reo, ka hau te rangatahi. Our rangatahi are the future leaders of tomorrow, and it is our responsibility to ensure they inherit a future where their rights, identity, and tino rangatiratanga are protected. Kai will share his perspectives and acknowledge the long-standing fight our tupuna from Te Reo, Ngāti Pikiahu Waiwai have endured, such as Paranahi Te Tau and Tamia Hosarank, who exercised rangatiratanga to retain our whenua. Their great-great-grandchildren, Turo Karatea, Hari Arapere, Paula Paranahi and Bruce Smith, carried this fight forward, giving evidence during our settlement claims Poreroa ki Manawatu District Inquiry in 2019. Heoi, kei aku nui, kei aku rahi, kei a koe taku I ramutu, te rākau kōrero I tēnei wā.
Tēnā koe, Auntie. Tēnā koutou I te komiti. Ko Kaia ngā wawata Joseph Tibu tōku ingoa. He uri tēnei no Ngāti Porou, Ngāti Tūwhare toa, Ngāti Raukawa, no te reo reo ahau o Ngāti Pikiahu Waiwai te hapu. I've been asked by my aunties to appear today on behalf of the rangatahi of Te Reo to oppose the Treaty Principles Bill. This government should be ashamed of this bill, a bill that has created a platform for division, to spread misinformation about Te Tiriti and mount a blatant attack on Māori. A bill that threatens to undermine the very foundation of this country. The Treaty Principles Bill is not just bad law. It is a deliberate attempt to roll back decades of progress. It is built on the same greed and ignorance that confiscated our land, silenced our language and culture, and denied our rights. It takes aim at the fragile trust that Māori have built in legal and political systems that were never designed for us. This bill does not exist in isolation, however. It is part of a pattern that Māori know too well. The Crown promises fairness, justice, and partnership, then finds a way to take back what little has been given, and yet, despite all the betrayals, we have continued to engage in good faith. I think of our kaumātua, our kuia and pakeke from Te Reo that my auntie has named, like so many others who have placed their trust in the Crown and engaged in the treaty settlement process. They have stood before the Crown, reopened old wounds, relived past injustices, and laid bare their pain. They did so not just for themselves, but for future generations and for us. And now with this bill, the Crown is pulling the rug from beneath us. It is making a mockery of that trust and those stories shared. It creates uncertainty for those of us that are still in the midst of the treaty settlement process, and it is proving the many fears of Māori who question whether this government has any intention of honouring its obligations at all. For those of us who have grown up with hope, who have seen progress in the recognition of te reo and the legal standing of te tiriti, and the slow but vital steps towards justice, this feels like a step back into the past. So I ask the question, does the government want their legacy to be one where te tiriti progress in this country goes backwards, and where a new generation of Māori grow up knowing that the Crown will strip away Māori rights the moment it becomes politically convenient? The people behind this bill claim they want unity, that they want a strong and fair New Zealand, but they are doing the opposite. True nation building is built on trust and responsibility, not on erasure, not on legal trickery, and absolutely not on a fundamental betrayal and breach of te tiriti. This government does not have the right to unilaterally rewrite those obligations, and the obligation is to honour it, not to twist it, not to water it down, and not to erase it. I conclude my submission with the following points. First of all, by recommending a new set of treaty principles that have not been agreed to by Māori, this bill undermines the sacred agreement between the Crown and our tupuna. Secondly, by attempting to rewrite these principles and ignore the Waitangi Tribunal recommendations, the Courts of New Zealand, and even current settlement policy, this bill aims to destroy the progress that we have made as a nation to recognise breaches of te tiriti and right the wrongs of the past. Thirdly, those who propose this bill are gaslighting proper Māori and Crown discussions about how we find ways to enable tino rangatiratanga and kāwanatanga to work, to the use of fake definitions of equality and fairness to distract citizens of Aotearoa from the real issues. As Matua Moana Jackson said to us all, the treaty is not about rights, it is about the rightness that comes from people accepting their obligations to each other. The rangatahi of Te Rere will continue to fight for this rightness as the descendants of those who broadcast seeds across this whenua that we may grow tall, strong, and not fall. I urge this committee to do the right thing, honour te tiriti, not just in words, but in action. Toitu te tiriti, toitu te rere, tēnā koutou katoa.
Tēnā koe, thank you for that.
Hei whakakapinga kōrero aroha mai, tēnā koe taku ira motu. Hei whakakapinga kōrero, we continue to stand together as Ngāti Pakeahu and Ngāti Waiwai united by our tupuna and the responsibilities we carry for the future of our people. 5 generations on from Paranahi Te Tau and Tamia Horse Rankin, we're still here continuing this fight for our rights, our land, our reo, our tikanga. My nephew Kaya stands here before the Select Committee today, continuing this fight on behalf of our people, our whenua and our future, and this is not right. If you claim to represent
can I interrupt you, Frances, and say we've got 3 members that want to ask questions.
Yeah.
It's really
I'm nearly finished. Tatamutu. If you claim to represent a just and fair Aotearoa, then act justly, do what is right, uphold the mana of te tiriti, reject the bill.
Kia ora, Frances, and thank you for indulging me in your in interrupting you. Let's go straight to questions. Tākuta.
Kei ngā uri o te reo tēnā koutou. Kei te whakaea ngā wawata, e kāia ngā wawata tēnā koe e tama. Kāia ngā wawata, do you think this bill will make your generation less or more determined to act in the rightness of te tiriti o Waitangi in the future?
Tēnā koe, tākuta I tēnā patoi. I think we've already seen some of the response from many young people. I must be honest, I'm 23, so I'm probably holding on to rangatahi status by a thread. Hoi anō, there are a number of young people that are being that have been exposed to what's happening, and I take my hat off to a number of young Māori who are spearheading initiatives and kaupapa that help educate young people on the truth about te tiriti, and I think fundamentally what we're seeing is a lack of proper education across Aotearoa about the history of this country and about te tiriti, and I think that's a fundamental starting point for any proper and robust conversation about te tiriti moving forward.
Tēnā koe tama.
Thank you for that. Let's go to Joseph Mooney.
Oh, thank you for that submission. I just wonder if you could give us a some practical examples of what tiro rangatiratanga actually means.
Oh, ka pai. Tino rangatiratanga, if we were exercising tino rangatiratanga, we wouldn't be here today. My nephew wouldn't be speaking to you today because our rights would be upheld already.
Are these sort of, can you just, for people watching, can you just give an example of what it actually means in practice?
Our rights to our land, rights to have rangatiratanga over our land, our reo, our own kura out in Te Whārua o Te Rere.
Thank you for that. We don't have time for another question, unfortunately, and we need to get to our next speaker. But thank you for that, and thank you especially to our rangatahi for a fantastic submission. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Our next submitter is Gregory Fortuin. See, kia ora, Gregory. Thanks for coming on to this Justice Subcommittee on the Principles of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill. Thanks for your submission. We've got 10 minutes for you to speak to it and answer any questions. It'd be great if you could leave some time for questions. I'll hand it over to you right away.
He hona rai he krore ki te atua, I maungaronga ki te whenua, whakaria pai kena tangata katoa. I started with a karakia in greeting the Honourable Committee as a promise to my Māori mentor that I would always start with a Māori karakia. And also, from a tone point of view, I in my submission, have said that I was keen to look beyond this bill that's going to die and what happens next. And so the question should never have been about treaty principles, but more importantly, how do we as a nation honor and respect the treaty in a 21st century democracy as a nation of 5.8 million people? And some of the objectives and goals of the principles bill are laudable, like to promote a national conversation, to build consensus about the treaty, to promote a greater legitimacy in social harmony and cohesion. But the outcomes have been abysmal. And so, for example, with the objective of greater social cohesion, if we take stock today, we've seen the largest march on Parliament. We have seen so much hate and division. The relationship between Maori and the Crown is worse today than when I was Race Relations Conciliator in 2001, all because of this bill. And not only have we bedeviled the relationship with tangata whenua, but we have also failed dismally in our undertakings that the key government gave in signing the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People in 2010. And now Joseph earlier from the Pacific Lawyers have already spoken about Article 3, where we've denigrated the recognition of Maori rights. But there's also the FPIC of it has to be free, prior and informed consent. We've ignored our commitment to the treaty, and we've ignored the participation in decision-making of Maori. So if we want to lecture other people on human rights, then we shouldn't be hypocritical by reneging on our own responsibilities. And so if we wish to renege, then go and say, no, we won't honor the declaration that we signed. But that's enough of the treaty principles bill, because I just quickly want to get to, we need to work towards this vision of a dream for 2040. So 200 years since the signing, who we want to be and the place of the treaty in a 21st century democracy. We don't have to be clones of each other. We don't have to assimilate, but we must be harmonized in our diversity. And we have to sing off the same hymn sheet. And so it's time that we started developing that hymn sheet. So a few suggestions. And the first one is that we must have this robust but respectful national treaty conversation. 30 years ago, I drove up to Pakai Tore. And for the first time in my life, I had a cup of tea in a tent with Dame Tariana Turia, with Sir Archie Tairoa, and the Ken Mayer. And I tell you the story to make the point that I'm not a tea drinker, but in order to listen, I drank the tea. And so if we want to have this national conversation, it cannot be one where we arrogantly lecture to other people. It has to be one of listening. It has to be one of probing and asking inquiring questions, not telling. And it has to be properly resourced. It has to be Crown supported. And it must be input from the local communities. It must be input from Maori leaders to ordinary Maori. It must be input from historians and legal experts, etc. But let's properly resource a respectful national conversation. And then there's been talk about a treaty commission or an advisory body. Then we should clarify the role of the Waitangi Tribunal and this treaty commission. And maybe the treaty commission, if it's properly clarified, could drive the activities towards 2040 and could play a lead. But if we have a treaty commission, it must have teeth, it must be properly resourced, and it must be co-led by both Tangata Whenua and Tangata Treaty. And then we need to have a robust education awareness campaign in the schools, at the citizens' advice bureaus, in all levels of New Zealand society. And all you have to do is go to all the treaty settlements and read the many speeches of apology as to why the government paid the treaty settlement. Particularly go and read the speeches of Chris Finlayson, where he talks about not just confiscation, but he talks about death and destruction. And so we should do that education so that all of New Zealand can understand that. We should also maybe focus on some community-based partnerships so that we could start doing some stuff together and build the relationship and the partnership together. And then we should explore maybe how in practice this Article 1 and Article 2 work. And we have contorted ourselves in wanting to reconcile the English version with the Te Reo Māori version. I don't think we're ever going to come to a conclusion. So let's just work out how can they coexist. And I suggest you go and talk to Bishop Kito and the Salvation Army Governance Board as to how come they got to an Article 2 runanga and they are actually growing their Maori mission. And then just lastly, I think we should have commemorative initiatives, which we start on now, and get the school children to maybe draft a declaration of shared goals and commitments, etc. And finally, if there is a referendum, imagine we had a referendum in 1840 when there was 98% Maori. Who do you think would have won that referendum? So if you want to have a referendum today, you will see the tyranny of the majority. You need to have two separate referendums, one for Maori and one for the other partner. I will continue to dream of us as a small nation at the foot of the Pacific, living in harmony and singing off the same hymn sheet. It is possible if we progress with integrity, with pragmatism, and most of all, respectfully being inclusive. Kia kaha, kia maia, kia manawanu, kino taumata. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you very much for that, Greg. We've got time for a very quick question there from Steve Abel.
Yeah, excellent submission. Thank you very much for coming and presenting to us. What is the harm that is done by, in general, to ethnic communities, tangata whenua Māori, obviously the subject of today, but the harm that has been done, well, we're all the subject, I suppose, the harm that is done by the license given to denial of Indigenous rights in terms of how it manifests in the community towards people who are potentially the subject of racial aggression.
Oh, look, if you saw the march against the bill, there's so much division. It's going to make it so much more difficult for this small country to have harmonized diversity. And I want to remain optimistic to focus on we can reconcile it. We can become a nation in harmony. And I don't want to focus on the extremes, but 80% of us in the middle want to see this nation that respects the treaty, but also lives in perfect harmony. It is possible with 5.5 million people. So I don't want to focus on the negatives.
Kia ora. Thank you for that, Gregory. Really,
Thank you.
I needed a cup of tea. Thanks very much for that.
Thank you.
Kia ora. All right, our next submitter is Luke Fitzmaurice Brown. Kia ora, Luke. Good to see you. Welcome to the Justice Subcommittee on the Principles of the Treaty Waitangi Bill. I'll do away with any formalities because we've got you for 10 minutes. It'd be great if you could leave some time for questions at the end, and I'll hand straight over to you. Kia ora.
Kia ora koutou, tēnā koutou te komiti, ko Luke Fitzmaurice Brown, aho, e uri tēnei no te Aupōuri, me airangi, ingarangi, ko te rangi me Norway, e hua aho no te tiriti o Waitangi. Kia ora koutou, my name is Luke Fitzmaurice Brown, a whakapapa tū te Aupōuri, as well as to Ireland, England, Scotland and Norway. I'm a legal academic at Te Herenga Waka, Victoria University, and I oppose this bill unequivocally. For the most part today, though, I'm not going to talk to you about the law. Many of my colleagues have already spoken eloquently about the legal impacts of this bill, and others will continue to do so. I commend to the committee the statements of experts like Ani Makairi, Carwyn Jones, Natalie Coates, Tai Ahu, as well as the findings of the Waitangi Tribunal's report on this bill. Those statements and sources will tell you about how this bill erases Te Tiriti in all but name, how it undermines Tino Rangatiratanga, and how it contradicts its stated purposes of certainty, conversation, and consensus. I agree with those sentiments entirely. But I think all of you, regardless of your parties, already know those things. So instead, I would like to spend my time focusing on what this bill takes away from us all. And to do that, I would like to tell you about my family. As I said in my mihi, I am a product of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. My Te Aupōuri tupuna signed Te Tiriti on the 28th of April, 1840, 150 years to the day before I was born, and 120 years to the day before my mum was born. In 1863, my great-great-great-grandfather, Gerald Fitzmaurice, whose last name I share, immigrated to New Zealand. Though the Crown had already failed to honour Te Tiriti by that time, his entry to this country and the life he subsequently made here was a product of that agreement 23 years earlier. I am a product of land confiscations. My Māori ancestors suffered from them, and many of my non-Māori ancestors will have benefited from them. This is the reality of this country's history, and more of us than we would like to admit are implicated in that. I am a product of the native schools era. My great-grandmother had her language beaten out of her, as did so many of her generation. I am a product of the great urban drift. My nana was the last of us to live up north before her family moved to Auckland when she was a teenager. I am the product of so-called integration. My great-grandfather was the Minister of Education who received the Hun Report in 1960, when the government acknowledged that Māori were not in fact a dying race and finally stopped trying to smooth the pillow, but instead turned its efforts to trying to keep us silent. That policy failed too, because I am the product of the Māori Renaissance. My family are not obvious candidates for that label. We grew up knowing we were Māori. We called it part Māori back then, but we never knew our whakapapa. But the ripple effects of the renormalization of things Māori were felt in our family decades later, as we, alongside thousands of others, learnt by osmosis that we had nothing to be ashamed of. My mother is the product of the treaty settlement era. She encouraged us to embrace our whakapapa, despite knowing little of what that meant. She took tentative steps herself, despite the pain that's sometimes involved. As Te Tiriti re-entered public consciousness, it also re-entered our personal consciousness, like a slow but inevitable glacier. My son is a product of Kohanga Reo. He is the first in our family to speak Te Reo Māori for 4 generations. He gives me hope that things can change because he is proof that they already have. He knew about Te Tiriti before he could read. We are all the product of Te Tiriti or Waitangi, Māori and non-Māori, and that is nothing to be afraid of. I'm proud of the resurgence of Te Tiriti in our country, even though it has been imperfect. In part, that is because my work has taught me about the positive impacts of that resurgence, law and policy, but it is also about the impact that it has had on me personally and on the people I care about. So many of my friends and family now have conversations about Te Tiriti or Waitangi that many of us wouldn't have imagined even 10 years ago. When the hikoi reached Wellington last year, my Pākehā dad was right there beside us. Te Tiriti for me remains a source of hope. These are the things that this bill, despite its assurances to the contrary, seeks to remove. Those assurances are a lie, and I think everyone on this committee knows that. The rest of us know that too. So while conversations about the impacts of this bill on law and policy are important because those impacts are numerous and devastating, in my view, it is also worth highlighting what is at stake for each of us personally. In diminishing Te Tiriti or Waitangi, this bill diminishes us all. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you for your time. Toitu Te Tiriti. I'm happy to take questions.
Good. Thank you for that submission, Luke. I see we've got a question from Joseph Mooney first, and then Steve Abel.
Oh, thank you, Luke, for that submission. Look, you raised some really interesting points there, and you point to the diverse whakapapa that you personally have, as do many in this country, and certainly something that's been expressed to me from various people is a uncertainty about their position in New Zealand, depending on which heritage they have. I think everyone's feeling uncertain at the moment, from Māori, non-Māori, and those who are, and share Māori and European ancestry. So just interested in any reflections you have on that, in terms of, from that perspective you have with that whakapapa that you've referred to.
Yeah, I think that's one of the great shames and one of the great harms of the way this conversation is currently playing out, and that it's a deliberate, in my view, stoking of fear about the role that Te Tiriti has in excluding people, when, in my view, that's a myth, and Te Tiriti can be this inclusive invitation which invites all of us to be here, Māori and non-Māori, on the simple condition that Te Noranga Tiratanga is upheld. And that being the case, that's nothing to be afraid of. And in fact, Te Tiriti is not something that was designed to keep people out. It was designed to set the conditions mutually and by consensus on which people can come in. And I think that is part of why I say it's kind of a source of hope. And I think that's a real loss in the way this conversation is currently happening in public.
Just a very brief supplementary, Mr. Chair, just on that Te Noranga Tiratanga point.
Sorry, Joseph. We've got other questioners. Steve Abel.
Kia ora. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Luke, thanks for your excellent submission. It's great to lay out your own whakapapa like that. Do you think that what we're experiencing now is sort of a blip, another blip in history that will be overwhelmed by this wave of kotahitanga, if you like, of those of us who want to see a nation that honours that founding agreement and is genuinely inspired to march in the streets and stand up for Te Tiriti?
Yeah, I think so. I think there is this inevitable growing of momentum of people who support Te Tiriti and don't feel threatened by it. And in part, that is rangatahi. You just heard from one on the committee this morning. You'll hear from others later. I teach Te Tiriti to some of those kaias, one of my students who appeared just earlier. And it's students like him and others that give me hope that that wave of momentum is inevitable, but I don't think it's just rangatahi. I spoke briefly about my dad, and I think it's people like his generation that I have seen change as well, and that I have seen that widespread tanga te tiriti embrace of that label and of te tiriti generally that does give me a sense of inevitability that we are slowly heading towards something better, and at the current moment is just a setback.
Thanks for that. And Takata, final question.
Tēnā koe e ruka I o mahi huhua hei hāpai te tiriti o Waitangi. Now, Luke, you're an educator on matters of te tiriti o Waitangi and naturally the history that came with it. I think my personal view is that what's on display is a clear and open demonstration of the lack of understanding, not only of the nation, but of the people elected to be decision makers. Now, do you think that if MPs were required to have a basic level understanding, and I'm sure you could describe what that would look like, but if MPs were required to have a basic level of understanding that this kind of proposition from one party and the subsequent national korero that's going on would persist? And do you think if they were required to have a basic understanding that that would be a positive thing for tiriti understanding going forward?
I do think that would be a positive thing. In that, I think that's something that would be good for all of us, and of course for our MPs. I actually think there's when you get right into the detail, it's hard to force people to do this because you then run into a few kind of democratic issues. But I think it's also something we should push for the other way. That's a grassroots thing, and that we should demand that of our representatives, regardless of our political parties, because I think there's a point at which once you grow that understanding, you can't, that reduces the fear of te tiriti, that this climate of fear is the product of a climate of uncertainty, where because this is unknown to people, and we all grew up with treaty myths. I grew up with treaty myths, and that's part of our shared history that we all now need to kind of work together to overcome. But so the short answer to your question is yes, but I think that's also something that we should demand from our representatives of all parties.
Kia ora, thank you for that, Luke. That brings us to the end of our time. Thank you for that submission. Look, I see we've got some other members joining us. I know we've given leave for the Labour Party to have an additional member, but I hope we can give leave for other members to ask questions from other parties. Of course, I'll stick to the equity across various parties. If there's no objection to that, I'll take that leave as granted. Kia ora, thank you. We now have Tasha Boa. Tasha's here, I think. I saw her pop up.
Tēnā koe.
Oh, you're sideways on the screen.
Okay. That better?
That's a little better. Thank you for that. That looks much better. Tasha, we've got 10 minutes for you to submit on the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill. So I'll hand straight over to you so we don't take up any more of your time. Kia ora.
Right. Tēnā koe e te tiamana. Mr. Duncan Webb, o te rā, tēnā rā tātou katoa. Ko Ngāti Rua Mahue, ko Ngāti Kura, ko Ngāti Kauau, ngā hapu, ko ngā puhi nui tonu te iwi, tēnā rā tātou katoa. As daughter of this nation, both Māori and Pākehā, it's a privilege to speak with you on this important kaupapa today. Today I'm going to outline a summary of my submission, taking it as read, and highlighting some key points to allow some time for questions. And so I will do that now. So I began my submission with the Māori Women's Welfare League Creed, which I think is a powerful statement. My first love is my family, but I know my tribe. I know my tribe, but I am proud of my race. I am proud of my race, but I am not racist. Therefore, I belong to my race, but I will serve my nation. And serve my nation I will do. So the key points of my submission are: 1, strengthen the foundations of this nation. 2, peace and justice. 3, disinformation and misinterpretation of the treaty principles. 4, inappropriate differentiation of te tiriti o Waitangi rights for iwi with settlement agreements, significantly impacting ngā puhi hapu and whānau. And 5, economic constraints regarding a referendum. So to point one, just to highlight, there are a number of people that have already spoken to that, but just stating there are huge examples of the hard work of hapu and iwi working with the Crown over decades. And so my expectation is that we would build on those positive examples and not tear down, and consider how we can move forward together. So moving to peace and justice. So we are a nation that is committed to a number of global instruments, and we are committed to peace and justice. And so some of those core instruments include international human treaties of the United Nations, and we've also been ranked as one of the most peaceful countries in the world. And I think that's something we should all be proud of. But, you know, recently in December 2024, I attended a global forum where there were a number of sector leaders across the world gathered, and rather than acknowledging some of the innovative work that's being done here in regional and at a national scale, the talk of the town at a global scale in a United Nations forum was, oh, how your country has regressed. And I want to speak to the shame and embarrassment that this proposed bill is bringing us as a nation. And my expectation is that we all consider some of those international core instruments that we have signed up to that actually commit to Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the treaty principles, and helping define what that looks like, and the voices of hapu and iwi Māori. So disinformation, moving to this point 3, the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet referenced the role of the government in strengthening resilience to disinformation with this definition, and it's a matter of national security, where individuals or groups communicate to share public perception in ways that can be manipulative, deceptive, or misleading. This can be referred to as disinformation. So while I appreciate that while freedom of expression is provided for and required amongst political parties, it would be prudent for this committee to consider what is the role and how do we ensure that we continue to abide by our own strategies in advancing resilience to disinformation. And this is really important, and there will be many layers, but this proposed bill is just one example of how disinformation needs to be considered in the political arena. And I'll move to point 4, so inappropriate differentiation for iwi with settlement agreements. So we in the North, ngā puhi nui tonu, kaitiaki of our constitutional documents, he whakaputanga and te tiriti o Waitangi. So we were the ones who ushered them in, and we will continue an ongoing role to ensure the integrity of these documents is upheld. And we've seen what an expression of pain looks like. You know, we've seen hikoi over the number of years. We've seen honeheke. We've seen hungihika travelling the country, and we've seen what happens at Waitangi commemorations. And so my focus for Aotearoa in our region, and it's a number of people's focus, is actually to restore us and return us to that place of economic prosperity so that we can power the economy of our nation together. We were once the most powerful economy, right? And so to differentiate us based on a settlement agreement, actually that's not appropriate. Te Tiriti o Waitangi, as well as He Whakaputanga, were signed, they were signed, and that needs to be upheld. And so there is no option to differentiate. Actually, these rights only apply where there is a settlement agreement, and they don't apply here to this people of the North. It's going to be really divisive and inappropriate to do that. And so I just urge this committee to consider the huge discrepancy that will cause if we differentiate between iwi with settlement agreements and those without. And then just touching on economic restraints. We expect everyone to work to their strengths, and there is an expectation that this time would be spent to recover our economy. And I mean, the last referendum that was held cost us about 42 million alone, without even considering the education components. And so we haven't even held an education component for our nation around this proposed bill. Now is not the time to be thinking about a proposed bill like the Treaty Principles Bill. Now is the time to recover our economy and ensure that we are all able to prosper. And so, yeah, I want to leave a bit of time for questions, but I do also want to touch on my concluding comments that were written in my submission by one of our young stars who is actually now globally renowned, Hana Rāwhiti Maipi Clark, and she emphasised the words ka ora tonu mātou, ake. And that was with the intention that the word whawhai or fighting would be replaced. And I do urge this committee to consider, now is a time to govern with peace and prosperity. Globally, we're seeing a lot of insecurity. Regionally, nationally, there are huge other pieces of work that need to be focused on. And so could we consider working together with well-being of our people in mind, so that, we can actually uphold our constitutional documents and build on what we've got rather than tearing down. Tēnā koutou.
Kia ora, Tasha, thanks for that. Members, does anyone have a question? Just Hana?
Tēnā koe, tēnā rā koe te komiti whakahaere Duncan, o tira tēnā koe e te maraikura e Tasha, ka nui aku mihi kia koe. I just wanted to also, something that really stood out for me in your submission was your line of, I am proud of my race, however, that doesn't make me a racist. I think I might say that. However, I did want to touch on you saying on your fourth point of economic restraints. So you said that there was the last referendum that we've had as a country, it cost us nearly $42 million. And for a government that wants to get our economy back on track, how do you think that will, if we ever do consider a referendum, how that will be so detrimental to our economy and our country?
Oh, e mihi ana for that tātai, tēnā koe. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's an expectation that every government will work to their strengths, and I'm not sure that this current government's strength is constitutional reform. And so, I mean, GDP is not where it should be. There are docs that have outlined and referenced that productivity is 40% lower than where it should be. Let this government focus on that. Let us actually just have that educational component over time, because there hasn't been the resource factored into that, and we should not be having a referendum without the required educational components that will lead to a wholesome conversation on such a critical core issue of national identity, who we are, and what makes us Aotearoa New Zealand.
Kia ora. Thank you, Tasha. That's really helpful submission. Steve, unfortunately, we haven't got time for your question. Members, if you use that little yellow hand, it helps me put those questions in order. So that's all good. But thank you for that submission. Our next submitter is Nanik Irawata. Kia ora, Naniko. Good to see you. We've got you here for 10 minutes on the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill. I won't hold up anymore. I'll hand straight over to you so we can get right into it. So kia ora.
Tēnā koe, tēnā koutou e te komiti whiriwhiri te ture, I ngā take ture meki. He mihi tēnei ki koutou e te komiti I tono mai he wā. Kia tuku taku tāpaitanga ki koutou o tira ki tātou katoa o Aotearoa. Tēnei au he mokopuna no roto I ngā mahi raupatu whenua te kāwana, ki rungi I oku nei mātua tūpuna. Tēnei hoki ahau he reo kāranga no roto I ngā mahi raupatu, ki taku I reo Māori, o tira ki taku mita o Taranaki, nā te kāwana I pērā ai ki rungi I oku nei kuia. Tēnei hoki he tamawahine no roto ngā mahi o Parihaka, o Kaipakopako, o Puketapu. I tēnei wā e tū ana I runga I tēnei āhuatanga. Ko taku tāpaitanga I te rānei, kia tū hei māngai mōku tamariki o ku mokopuna, ka whai heke mai. E whakahē rawatia nei taku katoa, ki tēnei pire, mō ngā mātāpono o te tiriti o Waitangi. He pire raupatu tēnei. He pire I te hanga ki te ngangara e ngau ana ki te kiri o te tangata. Karo katoa tēnei pire kia whakakiki I tōna ke puku. Ko wai mātau ki te whakahē ngā mātua tupuna, ngā ariki, ngā rangatira I haere te tiriti o Waitangi. Hoi anō ko tēnei pire, ko tāku aronga ki tēnei pire, he momo ngāngara, hoi anō ko tāku nei tono me ki kia whakamukua tēnei pire, kia tahuna ki te ahi, no reire te komiti whiriwhiri, koinei taku pātai me pēhia te whakangu I te oro o te mano tāngata I tai atu ki pōneke I ngā kaupeka kua hori. Rā te tāpaitanga tūpono ki te tangata, koira taku nei pono me ki. He tāpaitanga motuhake tērā I tai ngā iwi katoa o Aotearoa, I tai tiriti, tangata tiriti atu etehi, I tai iwi take etehi, I runga I te pono me tai mata me ki o a kanohi ki te kanohi, whatu ki te whatu, kia whakahua, kia kōwhitiwhiti kōrero I rangi te taia ki te kite I tētahi o ngā rangatira o roto I te kāwanatanga. Atu I ngā kanohi o etehi, koira tāku I tēnei wā, me pēhea te whakangu I te mano tāngata I tai atu a kanohi ki pōneke. Hoi anō I runga I tērā, mahanga momo whatinga o te tiriti o Waitangi, ko te riro whenua, ko te reo Māori, I pēhi nei ki roto I ngā kura, I pēhi te reo Māori ki ngā whānau huri noa I te motu, noho pērā tonu ana I te o ngā kaumātua, kārehe reo e rangi marama pūmau me whakarau ora I te reo Māori ki roto I ngā hapu, ngā whānau me ngā iwi. He momo āhuatanga I whatia no te tiriti o nā te kāwana I whati I runga I te tiriti o Waitangi ko te tāhai tamariki, ko te mauhere tāngata, te nuinga he Māori, ko etahi no ngā mahi whati I runga whati te tiriti o Waitangi, ko te whati te ingoa tūturu o ngā maunga, o ngā whenua, ngā tāngata, ngā tamariki. E rangi I tēnei wā tonu, ko tētahi tino whatinga o te tiriti o Waitangi, ko te urunga atu o tērā pire, hei pire. Nō reira, hei kōwhiti I roto I te reo Pākehā, I roto I te reo Pihikete, e rangi hei whakakapi I roto I te reo Māori. Ko tēnei me mukua ka tika I tēnei pire, I mua I tonu mai tōna pānuitanga tuarua. I'm just going to go into English. My name is Nanik. I am from Te Atiawa, Puketapu hapu, Otarawa hapu, Ngāti Kauwhata, Ngāpuhi, yep, from Ngāti Re here. So I stand with all my hapu, my iwi that have put their submissions in. I'm totally against this bill going ahead. But as a descendant of Murero Patu, which is my whare here, this whare of mine raised many families, including some of us that are actually watching or here in this Zoom. In Murero Patu specifically was a name that Te Whiti o Rongomai gave many, my ancestor Tamati Wanganui, to return home after being held in imprisoned in Otako to return home to name our whare muri Raupatu, is a reminder, a heavy reminder for us that things have been confiscated, things have been taken, but one thing that won't be taken is our journey to reclaim and revive what was taken, such as our reo, such as our whānau's disconnection to their papakainga. Te tiriti o Waitangi is a partnership between Māori and the Crown, where both parties respect each other, but it seems as if like it's just one-sided, and I'm sure that this that Te tiriti o Waitangi wasn't supposed to benefit one side. But I'm going to leave it like as is, my kōrero as is, and yeah, kia tere ngā tāpaitanga o i te hi atu. Na koe rā koe nei kōrero, tēnā koutou.
Kia ora, thank you, Nanik. We do have a couple of questions. I'll go straight to Steve Abel and then Hannah.
Kia ora, thank you so much for your submission. It's poignant that you have that that name behind you, that Raupatu, referencing the confiscations. Can you help the committee to understand, and tangata tiriti watching, the feeling that you have when there's a presumption that this bill is correcting some sort of advantage or privilege or special right that Māori have, where in the context of what you've just explained is that you as an iwi are in an effort to reassert your and reclaim the impacts of Raupatu, the winds of colonization that are still impacting Māori across the country, and yet we have this presumption that somehow there's an unfair advantage being held by Māori, and somehow non-Māori the disadvantaged ones.
Can you ask me the question again, more shorter and specific, give the right
quickly
answer?
Yeah, just really quickly.
Please.
You know, is it an insult to the principle of you know, upholding te tiriti, that somehow it's regarded that non-Māori have a privilege, that non-Māori are the ones that need to have privilege afforded them rather than Māori?
I think the insult is actually the question itself to be even existing, because we as Māori have had a long duration of trying to reclaim basics, just basics, and things such as having a right to speak te reo Māori. Let it be known that it was a legislation that actually made that happen, to be quite clear. And if it wasn't a legislation to, you know, ensure that there were schools to, you know, remove te reo Māori, or even, you know, such things as making it illegal to grow food within our takiwa, which is the case of why my ancestors were arrested and removed. So for me, like, it's a constant for our people to remain humble while we're actually suffering through legislations. And this year, this bill will actually cause not just for Māori, but it will be a catastrophe for tangata tiriti as well. Because at the current state of te tiriti o Waitangi, we are equal partners. And if that's changed, well, actually, this bill shouldn't actually, in my perspective, shouldn't have actually been introduced into Parliament. That there is also a breach of te tiriti o Waitangi.
I think you've given an answer. We haven't got much time, and Hannah Rafiti Maipi has a question.
Aroha mai, tēnā rā koe te whanaunga a te tuawahine, hei te mihi kia koe, me taku moho kai muri a koe ko tō mātou nei, marae o muru Raupatu, ka nui takutangi ki tēnā. Really quick, because I know we don't have a lot of time on our hands, but can you just explain maybe in 3 words, if you can, the PTSD that we get from having legislation like this, knowing that we've been through Parihaka Pā and the invasion in 1881, 144 years ago, And in 2025, we're still having legislation like this on our hands, knowing that we've only just had the settlement of the return of our maunga taranaki only last week. Can you give 3-word comparisons in the extreme opposite emotions that we could be feeling?
It's like having real bad whiplash, but we're still standing. So that's more than 3. But like our people, it's not just me, myself, yourself. There's thousands of us, like Liana Poutu. We're all trying our absolute best, and we'll still remain to look after our people.
Thank you, Nanik. We're out of time, but thank you for your submission. Kia ora.
Kia
ora.
Our next submitter is James Maxwell. Kia ora, James. Welcome to the Justice Subcommittee on the Principles of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill. We've set aside 10 minutes for your submissions. I'll hand straight over to you. It'd be good if you could leave some time for questions. Kia ora.
Tapu wai o nuku, tapu wai a ariki, tapu wai o tai. Ko ngā whetu ki te rangi, ko ngā kirikiri ki te one taitapa, ko ngā mana whakaheke o ngā kaihaina tiriti. A kia hiwara, kia hiwara. I am a member of Te Tiriti o Waitangi signatories, Ngaitai ki Tāmaki, and Te Whakatōhea, and a descendant of their representative Hapu Rangatira, Pūtiki, Rangi Huatake, and Taku of Ngā Tiriri Whenua, and Ngā Pōtiki, Te Aporotanga and Rangi Mātānuku of Ngāti Rua and Tauatoru of Ngāti Ngāhere, and also those of Te Wharetu Oi and Ngāti Te Rau of Ngaitai ki Tāmaki. I am the face of my ancestors and their collective experiences. See me roar. I am the hope of my descendants. Watch me stand vigil. He mokopuna taku iti. Heoi I tupuna takurahi. I am James Maxwell. Ko te reo o te pire ko te tāmitanga, ko te reo o te tāmitanga ko te reo Pākehā, kia whakatīna nā te reo noa aui ahau. I take this time in deference to the Crown and to the House through this subcommittee to change the intent and therefore application of the Treaty of Waitangi, to dismiss Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and to font power in parliamentary sovereignty exclusively, and notwithstanding treaty settlements, through the Treaty of Waitangi Principles Bill, without the free and informed consent of any other signatory, including Ngaitai ki Tāmaki, or Te Whakatōhea. I oppose this bill. I oppose this bill and Principle 1's representation of Crown mana. The aforementioned signatories have not ceded sovereignty to the Crown, but rather gave standing to the Crown to govern Pākehā through the maintenance of good law within the rohe of these signatories. The Crown's standing does not limit or override that of the referred to signatories within their own rohe, but offers an additional pathway to justice when needed. This is the continued understanding of the signatories and the whānau within those hapu who are signatories. My opposition therefore is concerned with the limitation of hapu rangatiratanga and the manu motuhake of signatories with a sole vacuum of power coalescing in the Crown through parliamentary sovereignty and manipulated through majoritarian democracy. Nowhere in the treaty did it state, and nowhere have signatories stated, that they wanted democracy and majoritarian democracy. My further opposition is solidified in Principle 2, attempting to restrict my rights to settlements. Settlements address grievances but cannot exhaustively define Ngaitai ki Tāmaki, or whakatōhea rights. And in Principle 3, we find issues in equality without equity as a form of genocide. It will kill my people because on the assent of this proposed bill, equity will be applied immediately without first addressing and completing remedy of colonisation and adverse impact to my people by the Crown. My opposition extends to the rhetoric created by this bill and the notion of kotahitanga equating homogeneity. Oneness comes in many forms. Kotahitanga can be one whole. Kotahitanga can also be 4 distinct quarters totaling a whole. Take a pie, for example, and split it into 4 pieces. One piece is the shade sky blue, one is the shade navy, one is the shade periwinkle, and one is the shade cyan. They are all one color, blue, but they are also distinct and unique at the same time. This bill attempts to strip me and my peoples of our inherent uniqueness and our worldview that informs the morals and ethics on which we hold to. A set of morals and ethics that underpin and root the ideals our law is founded upon. Tikanga, kawa, ritenga, āheitanga, āhuatanga. Mana tapu. This then speaks to the fact that the set of morals of my society are not mutually intelligible to those of the bill proponent. Now, it is not for this forum to comment on the morals of the bill proponent, or lack thereof in the case of sexual abuse, but it is for this committee to approach the understanding of this problem this bill proposes to solve. It is for this committee to question the morals this bill is based on. There has been no considered approach to the understanding of this problem that this bill apparents to solve. The RIS is not in depth and has not asked the intent of this bill, its influence on interacting law, and its impact upon our society. So we must now do that work. I must ask myself of the impact of misrepresented mana, of restricting signatory rights to settlements, and of equity without equality. Now, when I internally measure whether I'm taking on board the lessons of my tūpuna to inform whether I'm being a good tūpuna for the next generations, I have to ask myself, what is the world my whānau must exist in based on this bill then? In an ageing population and poor pensions, how will my parents, after years of service, interact with a healthcare system devoid of care? Will health equality without healthcare inequity see them dead in 5 or 10 years' time? What would be the experiences of my ira mutsu, Tame Edmund Tūmata Kōkiri Li Paku, be under principles purported in this bill, which seeks to extinguish his uniqueness, informed by his haputanga, his iwitanga, his indigenous nationhoods, which affords him his connection to a set of morals, ethics, and behaviours repugnant to the homogeneity and Pākehā assimilation this bill desires. The question before me, and what I now lay down for you, is really quite simple. Is this bill mana enhancing or mana munching? Is this bill proponent and the morals upon which they have created this bill a mana enhancer, or is he a mana muncher? To these principles, provide for the 3 M's, and you will see in my submission the 3 M statement. The 3 M statement says that colonization consists of the 3 M's, the missionaries, the military, and the masses. The missionaries to pacify the signatories, the military and police to keep the signatories pacified, and then the masses to overpopulate and assimilate signatories through majoritarian democracy. What Te Tiriti offers and what the treaty does not offer is kia whakapūmaitia te mana motuhake o ngā hapu kai haina tiriti. The marae, the mauri, and the mana. The marae, the hearts of the signatories. The mauri, the life essence of the signatories and their relationships to each other and the taiao. And the mana, the power and authority of the signatories to exist as them.
Kia ora, thank you for that. Members, we've got a little bit of time for questions if anyone has one. No? Okay. Hannah, go for it.
Tēnā rā koe, James Maxwell, kōrero I te rangi nei, ka nui taku ora ki a koe. Just wanted to talk on if you could describe any of the 3 M's that you could currently see in today's context in the 21st century and some similarities maybe that you've touched on.
Sure. So we can see I guess, the idea of the masses overpopulating, which is the first M, which is the third M in the first set of M's. And I guess the masses is a way for minorities to slip through the cracks when they will be subjected to majority opinion and then voting based on size. We can see that this has already happened in some other areas, but we have also seen where that has been restricted to some places as well. But I think the other area that I want to touch on quickly is the area of Māori and the area of mana, which we can see just by the kanohi that are turning up and submitting through this process. We can see that that is still alive in some limited way here. And whilst their mana and the Māori within their kōrero are not extinguished, this bill has the potential to violate that. So it is seen but not heard in some places.
Kia ora, James. Thank you for that. That brings us to the end of the submission. Thank you very much for submitting to the committee. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Our next submitter members is Rihanna T.
Tēnā koe, Duncan.
Tēnā koe, Rihanna. Lovely to have you here. We've got you for 10 minutes, so I won't take up any more time. I'll hand straight over to you. Kia ora.
Ka pai. Kia ora, I take my submission as read because I'm going to be freestyling from it anyway. I made a couple of TikToks last year explaining the actual treaty principles and where they came from, and those TikToks gained a lot of interest. I had Southern Waikato farmers thanking me for the explanation, emails requesting to show them on a big screen at the Whakatane Saturday markets, a law firm in New Plymouth showing them to all staff, and most importantly to me, my dad getting calls from his old boys rugby mates, saying that for the first time ever, they understood what the arguments were about. This shows clearly that the majority of New Zealanders don't know what the treaty does and that the ACT Party is relying on that. I haven't seen them put any effort into actually educating New Zealand on where the principles come from, other than railroading people to their website, which people can tell is sneakily worded. And that's because if all New Zealanders actually understood the history of the Treaty of Waitangi and what the principles do, the only people who would be left on his side are Hobson's Pledge. Because New Zealand culture is about looking after people, stopping on the side of the road to help with a tyre, being fair and doing what you say you're going to do, and honouring the treaty fits perfectly in that category. On this basis, I want to talk about a couple of the points David made in his oral submission and his interviews afterwards. David says that New Zealanders have been excluded from the conversation and everyone wants to be involved in deciding what the treaty principles are. On that basis, David and Hobson's Pledge have to be disappointed by 300,000 submissions. There's over 3.5 million registered voters and not even 10% cared enough to put a submission in. And the reason behind that is because most New Zealanders don't care. Pākehā New Zealanders don't feel oppressed by the Treaty of Waitangi, and Māori don't feel advantaged. It's genuinely delusional and disrespectful to say that Māori are advantaged. I wish someone could go back and tell my dad that he could just use his Māori privilege while he was cold calling people out of the white pages, asking if they need an arborist. To say that Māori are advantaged is an insult to all hard-working Māori. For anyone who might be wondering why David is so upset by the Treaty of Waitangi when most people don't think about it at all, it's because it's an inconvenience to people who want to thrash the environment. Mining the seafloor, drilling for oil, forestry. If you watch all of David's interviews about this issue, he goes on and on about the Resource Management Act and the fact that iwi have had the right to be consulted when someone tries to do these environmental projects. So the only people who are really oppressed by the Treaty of Waitangi are overseas companies and big developers who are trying to get their grubby mitts on New Zealand's environment. Because I guarantee you that normal New Zealanders are not lying awake at night, staring at the roof, thinking about the treaty provisions in the Resource Management Act. In his submission, David mentions that freedom under the law doesn't guarantee wealth or material equality, which translates to not everyone can be rich. He says it creates the best opportunities for prosperity. In other words, you can get ahead. And I don't disagree with this point he's made, but it comes down to whether you think that's the goal or not, where a handful of people can get ahead and get super rich, but it relies on everyone else being left behind. There's no reason we can't have the opportunities to get rich if you work hard, but if you're not lucky in a lot of the ways that you need to be, that doesn't mean you're screwed. I want to directly quote David here. He said, every country in the world is in the business of trying to help people and that non-Māori are also disadvantaged. First of all, helping people is not a business. Secondly, of course, non-Māori are also disadvantaged because the way things are set up right now is for some people to get ahead, which relies on everyone else being left behind. That's why we have 2 income households working full-time still struggling to pay bills, but that's not the Treaty of Waitangi's fault. The point that David has conveniently forgotten is that when Māori get left behind, they get left further back. Māori die nearly 7 years earlier on average. Nearly 70% of kids in Oranga Tamariki are Māori. Māori suicide rates are nearly twice as high. I'm not rehashing all the statistics because at the end of the day, I know that David already knows, but his answer just seems to boil down to someone's got to be in poverty. The main thing David Seymour has been successful in is drumming up a strange victim complex among a really small group of Pākehā. He's told them that they're missing out on tino rangatiratanga and now they feel ripped off. But most people still don't know what tino rangatiratanga is. Tino rangatiratanga looks like Kohanga Reo and Kura Kaupapa, which are Māori language immersion schools that teach Māori values, who have achieved better statistics on passing NCEA and merit and excellence endorsements than mainstream schools. Tino rangatiratanga looks like actually letting iwi help Oranga Tamariki look after kids. If New Zealanders had any idea how badly the government has been fumbling Māori kids in Oranga Tamariki's care and how long iwi have been scrapping for the right to look after these kids, people would understand why the treaty is necessary. He says, where in the world has dividing people by race worked? Firstly, that's so dramatic. The treaty doesn't say Māori can go to Pack and Save but Pākehā must go to Countdown. It's just upholding treaty rights. That's a contract. If New Zealand can't stop breaching the very first contract it entered into, then that must make New Zealand a terrible place to do business in. Secondly, Canada. Canada has their treaty rights actually written into their constitution, and they're not going down in a burning pile of poverty and civil war. The last point I'd like to make is that David says the bill is all about equality and that he only wants to start a national conversation. If it's all about equality, I wonder if he knows that the main argument for a capital gains tax is equality. Basically that it's not very equal that rich people get to skip paying tax because they don't make their money through wages. But strangely, we haven't seen David upset about unequalness when it comes to tax. So I would just like to plant the seed or start a national conversation that any future referendum about equality, whether it's in 10 or 20 years' time, should focus on a capital gains tax just for, economic efficiency. Heoi anō, hei whakakapi ake I konei, the government needs to wake up. New Zealand's statistics for homelessness, prisoner reoffending and child poverty are so embarrassing on an international scale. It's clear that what we have right now doesn't work, so it's time for the government to actually embrace tino rangatiratanga and the traditional Kiwi number 8 wire mentality and start being real-world leaders in Indigenous relations. E mihi nei ki ngā toki o te whawhai mo te tiriti I roto I ngā tau, nā rātou te huarahi I para, hei whai mā te mai te tiko nei. Koia tāku, that's all I have to say. Tēnei au ka mihi.
Kia ora, thank you very much, Rihanna. Love your work on social media. Let's go to Steve Abel first.
Can I defer to Hannah first? I'll jump after that if there's time.
Okay, Hannah.
Thank you, Steve. O tira, tēnā rā koe te tua wahine. E kore ngā mihi e mutu ki a koe me o mahi kua whakatairanga e koe ki runga I ngā pai āhua I te whakamata wera momo mea kānui taku mihi. I just wanted, my one question is, could you just talk about maybe some of the stereotype misconceptions that you said to say Māori are advantaged are a disadvantage to hardworking Māoris. So what are some of the misconceptions that we have some type of advantage in our country? Do you think you could touch on some?
I think one of the misconceptions is that Māori are lazy and all on the dole. Every Māori I know is incredibly hardworking. If you try to tell me that my uncles and my dad are lazy, there's no way. They're the hardest working people I know. And I think that people forget that that's the majority of Māori. They're not necessarily marching in the streets. They're out there working and contributing to the economy. And some people have no idea how the Treaty of Waitangi affects them, and that's not their fault, but it's just a responsibility of the New Zealand government to educate everyone.
Steve.
Yeah, kia ora. Thank you for your excellent submission. You touched on a really important point, I think, that the author of this bill is cynically using a principle of equality to justify nullifying Māori tino rangatiratanga, because really the motive is that it's a barrier to corporate free exploitation of our oceans, our coastlines, and so forth. That's what you alluded to. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it in my oral submission as well, that the Treaty of Waitangi and the partnership principle in particular has given iwi the right to be consulted on a number of things like resource consent applications. One example would be the seabed mining off the shore of Taranaki. And most people aren't bothered by that because they're not trying to do seabed mining. So the people who are really upset by it are the overseas companies trying to get into seabed mining here. Yeah.
Yeah, well articulated. I completely agree.
Thanks.
Okay. Hey, look, thank you for that. A really good submission, and thanks for your contribution to the debate. Kia ora.
Tēnā koutou.
Kia ora.
Members, our next submitter is Stu Bartlett.
Hello.
Oh, kia ora, Stu. I can hear you there, but I can't see you.
Yeah, might be a couple of tech. Oh, there we go.
There you go. That's great. Stu, thanks for coming on to the subcommittee of the Justice Select Committee on the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill. We've got you for 5 minutes, so I won't take up any more time. I'll hand straight over to you. Kia ora.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just firstly want to acknowledge the row of young submitters who came before me, and it both humbles and heartens me in equal measure to be able to listen to the next generation of New Zealanders speaking so well about such an important matter. Particularly to the last submitter, I spent 33 years of my life working at Oranga Tamariki and its antecedents, both as I was Chief Legal Advisor and I was a Principal Policy Advisor there. To the extent anyone might doubt what the history of Oranga Tamariki is in relation to Māori family, I have lived through it. I understand it. It is real. And it is a great irony that this bill is so close to the response to the Royal Commission of Inquiry into children and other people in care. And for anybody who wants to understand, the Waitangi Tribunal's report on Oranga Tamariki is just a fabulous piece of work. I'll be very short though, because I've got my submission speaks for itself. I will summarise it simply by saying a more contemptuous, disrespectful middle finger shown by one treaty partner to another treaty partner, I have yet to, it is almost impossible to contemplate arrogance of this nature being shown by the Crown in New Zealand, at least in the 21st century. We can talk about Mr. Seymour. I see it as a favour of leadership. This bill should not have been allowed to enter the House. It was a disrespectful thing to allow to happen. And as I suggest, I think it was just grubby and very distasteful. But it is a leadership issue. Fringe parties have fringe ideas. Statesmanship and leadership requires those ideas to be filtered properly. Look, so my main submissions, I doubt that Parliament has the jurisdiction to unilaterally alter the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. And the fact that it is asking the nation that question shows how close we are coming to a constitutional crisis. You know, the right to govern that was granted by the treaty, I doubt very much was the intent was to grant the unilateral power to amend the treaty. It's just a nonsense. So for the legal reasons why I doubt Parliament has jurisdiction, are the same reasons why it is just an outrage and a disgrace. And that's probably the reason why Parliament doesn't have jurisdiction. And if this bill did pass, and let's hope it does not, it would be very interesting to see what the courts would make of it. But beyond my submission, what everyone else has said. This is the time for education. This is the time to help New Zealanders understand not just the Treaty of Waitangi and its principles, but the constitutional arrangements and governance arrangements under which this country works. You know, like some of the equality in this bill, I think, has been borrowed from the American sense of equality. And I don't think we need US-style equality in this country, but I think we could learn a trick from them about the fact that they teach civics. You know, 14, 15-year-old kids learn about how America works. We do not do that here. And for policy makers in the future, that is one of the most important things facing this country. And this bill has brought that to light.
Stu, thanks for that. And I have read your submission, so thanks for that. Steve Abel has a question. Can we go to that now?
Yes.
Thank you.
Kia ora, Stu. You talk about the particular knowledge of the state's catastrophic invasion of Māori family life in the direct and at least reckless breach of the treaty. I wonder, can you express to us how the current inequality we deal with in our society can't be addressed by this specious concept of equity that relies on removing rights from Māori?
Yeah, I get a bit mixed up, Steve, about equality and equity. I think equitable treatment is vitally important, but equality is used as being a shield to prevent that from happening, I think, is what's happening. I mean, Anatole France said that the law in its majestic equality allows both the rich man and the poor man, if they steal a loaf of bread, to go to jail. I mean, that's equality. But what we need is equity in this country, and we do not have it. And the false flag of equality, which this treaty principles bill, and incidentally, the principles which have been forward are impossible to deduce from the text of the treaty itself. So I can't understand how they can be principles, but they are a false flag. And yes, if you read the Waitangi Tribunal report, it is so clear that the fact that Māori families have been under so much pressure, and leaving aside that they're just basic racism involved over the last 70 years, Māori families are under more pressure. That pressure is a direct result of policy choices.
Stu, thank you. I'm going to interrupt you there because your time is up, but thank you very much for that submission. Kia ora.
Thank you. Bye.
Members, our last submission this morning is Tim Applin for 5 minutes.
Good morning. I'm going to try and do this rather quickly and go in reverse order. So the third principle, I broadly support the bill. I have a few quibbles. The third principle, we've heard a lot of my esteemed co-presenters talking about equity versus equality. I'm opposed to equity, but I love equality. Equality is me being able to run the 100 meters race. Equity is weighing down whoever's the fastest at the moment so that they can run the same time as me. I don't think that's right. The second principle, I see Steve shaking his head, but we disagree. Second principle, I'm not going to talk too much about. When it comes to matters of law, I'm an originalist and a textualist, which is I like to consider what was in the minds of the people that drafted the legislation and go with that. So I'm not going to speak too much about that one. But where I do have a number of quibbles is on the first principle, which is that the New Zealand government has the full power to govern. As a flag-waving libertarian, I don't think the government should have the full power to do anything. I am very much of the flavour that when the government is restricted in its ability to infringe upon our natural rights, that produces the fairest and the freest societies, which are, but as a consequence, the most prosperous. That's my submission. I leave it open to questions, and I can see Steve has his hand up.
Steve does, and so we'll go straight to him.
Thank you, Tim. What do you make of the problem of us having treating everyone equally, when there is a pre-existing inequality, and I can't think of a better articulation than Marilyn Waring's in her submission. I wonder if you could respond to this. She says, where a person or peoples have been subject to socially constructed, historic, systemic, and systematic accumulative disadvantage, equality cannot be achieved through equal treatment.
I would say, in short, that is a Marxist fan fiction. If we look, say, for example, Japan, the United States absolutely leveled them during World War II, fire bombings, and of course the 2 atomic bombs that were dropped on them. They seem to do all right. We could look at, for example, North Korea and South Korea as a great example. East Berlin and West Berlin. Fantastic example. Both had the same pre-existing conditions, namely the outcome of World War II. And what we found is when you had the system that I advocate for, which is free and fair, one side, West Berlin, prospered, East Berlin suffered until the Berlin Wall came down.
But you would acknowledge there's vast investment
I'll just interrupt you, Steve.
And Germany.
Steve, I'll just interrupt you because we've got Hannah and we've only got a little bit of time left. It's a short submission.
Yeah.
Yeah, kia ora, Tim. Just one question from me. Do you think every child has the right to have access to learn their language?
Yes. I am a great admirer of language. I believe that language should be taught. I'm English, as you may be able to tell, and my experience, I used to holiday in Wales, and I was growing up when the Welsh language had a resurgence. And so understanding language is key to understanding culture. I will say this, though, when it comes to the pragmatic elements of having an integrated and homogenous society, one language does have to take precedence. We can have that conversation. I know Steve is disagreeing with me, but when I hear overseas, when I see words that I'm not familiar with, again, that's my problem. And particularly when I hear almost a form of a pidgin English where words are freely substituted, it makes it difficult to communicate. I know that this is a very contentious topic, but that's my personal view. Yes.
Steve, got time to come back for you for a quick sup, if it's quick.
I guess the sup is that it's not about weighing down the faster horses, is it? It's actually about acknowledging that that if you treat all things as equal, that you're denying and you're locking in the pre-existing disadvantages that are a consequence of colonization and land loss and crushing and subjugation of language and culture and atrocities. And that is a fundamental injustice that goes against our founding agreement.
In order for me to agree with your point, Steve, I would just have to ask, what is the statute of limitations on that? At what point, I mean, if I go to look at English history, 1066, the Normans came in and sacked everyone. We had, what, 200-300 years of Norman rule. I don't hate France. At what point do we say, okay, there has been some wrongs done in the past, which I fully acknowledge. Many of the things that my ancestors did around the world, rather reprehensible. But we also have to acknowledge that at some point we have to say, are these problems caused by actions, in New Zealand's case, 150 years ago, or are they caused by cultural and continued attitudes, values, poor decisions, which are not the result of ancestry, but are the result of culture? Now, that is a much more nuanced and difficult conversation.
I'm going to interrupt. Because I think you've answered the question. Thank you, Tim. And we're out of time. So thank you very much
for your time, gentlemen. And Hannah and Rima, very much appreciate it.
Kia ora, ngā mihi. And I'll just ask our clerk to clarify, do we need to meet in private before we go into public after lunch?
Kia ora, members. To resolve the matter of the one submitted in the afternoon, you would need to go into private session to decide what to do about that slot.
Okay, members, you'll have heard that. You've got the link in the agenda. We just need to clarify one issue before we go